Welcome to This Explainer, where we are going to completely dismantle the illusion that perfectionism equals high standards. And more importantly, we're going to equip you with the tools to actually finish your work. Look, if you've ever found yourself endlessly tweaking a project, delaying a launch, or just hesitating to share your ideas because they aren't quote-unquote ready yet, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Right out of the gate, author Derek Neighbors hits us with this brutal truth. Perfectionism is fear wearing the mask of quality. Wow, let that sink in. It immediately shatters this idea that being a perfectionist is some noble, positive trait. We so often treat perfectionism as a humble brag, right? Like it's a sign of our unwavering commitment to high standards. But the truth, as we'll see throughout the source material today, is that perfectionism is really just a defense mechanism. It's fear, pure and simple, dressed up in a fancy suit. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. First, the perfectionism delusion. Second, the thinking, feeling connection. Third, challenging your thoughts. Fourth, excellence versus perfection. And finally, embracing strategic imperfection. Let's dive into Section 1, the perfectionism delusion, unmasking the fear. Let's be real, we've all said these exact things. They sound totally professional, but guess what? They aren't about quality at all. I have high standards, or it's not ready yet, are literally just lies we tell ourselves to avoid the vulnerability of being judged by others. Neighbors points out this brilliant example of a leader who insisted that absolutely everything be world-class. The code, the design, the process, the whole shebang. And you know what happened? Nothing ever shipped. Their competition released a super basic version, totally owned the market, and that world-class product died before it ever saw the light of day. The perfectionism wasn't protecting the product, it was just protecting the creator's ego. Check out this classic trap that recently surfaced on a productivity forum. Imagine a student who has to make a presentation. They end up spending 90% of their time meticulously obsessing over the first half of their PowerPoint slides. And what happens? The second half is completely rushed, they don't get a chance to rehearse, and they ultimately fail to deliver their full message. If they had just made the entire presentation okay, they would have been far more successful than delivering a half-finished masterpiece. It just perfectly shows how perfectionism entirely destroys practical time management. Moving on to Section 2. The thinking, feeling connection, your internal landscape. So, a clinical psychology workbook from the Center for Clinical Interventions suggests something super interesting. They call it taking a helicopter view of your mind. Basically, we think all the time, mostly on total autopilot. And some of these are negative, automatic thoughts reflecting unrelenting high standards. To actually reduce the negative impact of perfectionism, you need to step back, zoom out, and become an objective observer of your own habitual thinking. And that brings us to the crucial ABC sequence. This framework is a real game changer because it proves that it isn't the activating event, the situation itself, that makes us distressed. It's the B, our underlying beliefs about that situation, which leads to C, the consequences, meaning how we feel and what we do. Basically, if we want to change the miserable consequences of perfectionism, we have to intercept the beliefs. Just look at how two students can experience the exact same activating event, an 80% grade on an assignment, with vastly different consequences. Sally is thrilled. She feels super proud and thinks, hey, I worked hard, this is a great reward. But Sarah, who is driven by perfectionistic, unhelpful thinking styles like shoulding and musting, thinks, I'm an idiot, I should have studied way harder. She actually punishes herself and cancels plans with her friends. The 80% grade didn't make Sarah miserable. Her own unhelpful mental filter did. Which brings us to Section 3, challenging your thoughts, becoming a detective. To actually break this cycle, you can't just sit there and argue with yourself in your head. It gets way too messy. You literally have to write it down and act like a detective, or maybe a lawyer, using a thought diary. When a highly distressing, or what they call a hot thought, hits you, something like, I am lazy and useless because I missed one practice, you visually separate the actual facts on paper. You list the factual evidence that supports the thought, and then the factual evidence that disproves it. You quickly realize that a firmly held opinion in your head is definitely not the same thing as a fact on paper. This process replaces that rigid and flexible perfectionism with healthy, balanced beliefs. All right, Section 4, excellence versus perfection, a paradigm shift. As Psych Central points out, these two concepts are literally worlds apart. Perfectionism pursues a flawless performance with zero tolerance for errors, and honestly, it takes a massive mental toll. Excellence, on the other hand, emphasizes continuous improvement and learning from mistakes. Excellence is so liberating because it allows you to actually be, a human being who learns through doing. The ancient Greeks understood this deeply. They called it arete, or excellence of function. Arete is not an end state. It's not a final, perfect achievement. It is a way of being. You do not achieve excellence by hoarding your best ideas in a drafts folder until they are flawless. You achieve excellence by consistently creating good things, releasing them, and getting better through practice over time. They also practiced another absolutely vital concept, phronesis, which translates to practical wisdom. It's the ability to discern the right action in specific situations. Phronesis is knowing that, yes, while a surgeon absolutely cannot embrace strategic imperfection on a patient's incision, and a pilot certainly can't just ship a good enough landing, a writer absolutely can and should embrace imperfection on a first draft. It's having the wisdom to know when imperfection serves the mission and when it betrays it. Finally, we reach Section 5, embracing strategic imperfection and shipping your work. The consequences of not shipping your work are severe. Author Derek Neighbors brutally highlights this when he admits that he wrote a whole book about how organizations die when they fail to adapt. Yet he killed his own book at 60% completion because he couldn't adapt his own perfectionist standards to reality. For years, the manuscript sat in his drafts folder, perfect and completely useless to the rest of the world. Oh, the tragic irony. So why is this so incredibly hard? Well, as writer Phil Rosen notes, going from 0 to 1 is the absolute hardest step for creators, founders, and professionals. It's infinitely harder than going from 2 to 3 or 10 to 20. Going from 0 to 1 requires pulling something out of thin air and exposing it to the unforgiving real world. It requires the courage to hit publish or send, fully knowing the work has flaws, because getting that external feedback is literally the only way you actually grow. To survive this terrifying 0 to 1 leap, Rosen suggests you must default to optimism. Think about it. If you look at early stage work and immediately ask, is this a $1 million idea or a flawless masterpiece? You are going to crush it under the weight of those expectations. Instead, treat your pursuits like experiments. Ask yourself, what are the reasons this could succeed? By defaulting to optimism, you can survive being a bad writer, creator, or professional just long enough for your abilities to actually catch up to your ambitions. I really want to highlight this brilliant summary from a productivity user quoting a much wider philosophy. Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Now, this doesn't mean you strive for garbage. It just means you have to start when you aren't ready. You have to allow yourself to be slow, to hit plateaus, and to make mistakes. Because at the end of the day, a finished, imperfect project is always going to be a perfect, unfinished one, every single time. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Look at that project you've been hiding from the world. Are you holding it back because it truly isn't ready to serve its purpose? Or are you simply afraid to be judged? Perfectionism is a trap, but strategic imperfection, that's your key out. What imperfect thing will you ship today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I highly encourage you to take these insights, get out there, and put something beautifully imperfect out into the world.